You're listening to the We Are Libertarians podcast network. Find all of our shows at wearelibertarians.com.
Episode 77, The Paradox and Amash Files, special Patreon release.
Welcome to The Paradox with your attending, Dr. Eric Larson. He is a practicing anesthesiologist and clinical assistant professor at Michigan State University College of Human Medicine. Listen in as he takes you behind the scenes of what practicing medicine in today's ever-changing world is like with another doctor. The Paradox is a fun and accidentally informative show for physicians, patients, or anyone who has ever found themselves in a waiting room.
Welcome to The Paradox. I'm your host, Dr. Eric Larson. Thank you for joining me as we explore the U.S. medical system and fun. Oh, wait, this is totally different. This is actually not going to be about the U.S. medical system because today's release is from my Patreon subscribers, but I'm going to release it to the public so you have an idea of what we're talking about on the Patreon site. It's actually not usually medical. Occasionally it is. So I appreciate the support from the patrons who want to hear more medical content. But as far as extra content, I also want to just deliver something a little unique. And so, as is probably obvious throughout a number of the episodes, I'm very interested in politics. People who know me personally know that I'm very interested in politics. I think this is a personal deficiency in my part, and so I apologize, and I feel bad that I find politics interesting, but that's what it is, and so there's where my interest lies. But anyway, I'm good, close personal friends with Representative Justin Amash, who's making a bit of a name for himself, and there's a lot of speculation about what he's doing, and I've been very supportive of him, and unapologetically, because I think he's a great guy doing great things, and politically we align with each other pretty closely. And so I want to just have a discussion with you about what's going on with Justin. But I want to bring in other experts, other people who have different opinions. We've talked about immigration. We've talked about other issues with Justin and whether he's going to run or not. And so today I have a really special guest. And so I thought this is probably one, if you have interest in this sort of thing, to become a Patreon subscriber, have access to this. And we'll just call it the Amash Files for now. And so I met with Nathan Lemur. And Nathan and I go back quite a ways. Nathan was one of the first staffers that Justin had when he was in the State House in Michigan in the 72nd District. He then followed him to Congress when Justin won his congressional seat and was there for a while and then hopped around for a few different places, which is what happens to young people when they go to D.C. and they find new opportunities. He went to an organization called Generation Opportunity, which is sort of young, hip, they sort of talk about politics and things. And then he went to serve as a policy advisor, and probably where he's most famous, is a policy advisor for the FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, who was probably best known for striking down net neutrality and to trying to keep the internet open. There's certainly have your opinions on net neutrality, but Nathan was actually very involved in the policy and the sort of the public advocacy for Chairman Pai's position. And so he's had a lot of opportunities to see all sorts of different things and work with lots of different people in Congress and in the Senate. He also has left that position, and his next stop is with an organization called Targeted Victory, which is obviously political. And he's living in D.C., so naturally he's political. But we had a really great discussion. We talk about Justin and a few things. What is he really like? What is he like working with? Because I've obviously just known him personally. I don't know what he's like in the office. So we give you a better feel for what he's like professionally and then obviously personally. And then we discuss the two main races. One is he's currently committed to running for Congress here in the 3rd District of Michigan. He renounced his party membership in July of 2019 on July 4th, where he made his own declaration of independence. And he's been independent since. And he is definitely not beholden to any party. Not that he really ever was before, but he felt some obligation to keep his rhetoric at a low simmer previously, and now he no longer feels the need to do that. So he's more himself, I suppose you'd say. And the race will be him as an independent, a Republican, and a Democrat. And so what does that look like? Can he win that sort of race? Will he lose? And then what sort of implications from a national standpoint would that race have? Does it send a message to the rest of the country, or does the country just shrug it off and not care? Secondly, we talk about probably the more interesting race is the potential that he runs for president. We talk about if he runs for president, can he win? And I think, as I said in the show, it's not zero, and I think it's more than just like 1 or 2%. I think there's actually a legitimate chance, and the calculus is there. And you don't really know what's going to happen in the political season. So we discussed that. And so I think it's a real fun discussion about that. And as far as strategy and stuff, I think that's what Nathan and I will do for part 2. So, but it'll depend on what Justin decides to do. I suspect that we'll know within a month. So this is being released at the end of January. Probably by the end of February, March, there'll be some answer whether Justin is completely ruled out running for president or if he decides to just go for it. And so till then, the Amash files will continue on, and even afterwards they still will. So we'll talk about his race and very unique situation in the 3rd District in Michigan. But without further ado, discussion with Nathan Lemur, who is the former policy advisor to FCC Chair Ajay Pai, and a discussion on Congressman Justin Amash. Who is he, and can an independent/libertarian win the presidency? Enjoy. Well, welcome, special subscribers. I have a really fun episode here for you today. I'm speaking with Nathan Lemur, who is a good friend of mine from back in days of West Michigan. Nathan was most recently and most famously, I joke, was the policy advisor for the FCC chair, Ajay Pai, and he just recently left that position, and he's now a new spot in D.C. But intimately knowledgeable of our friend Justin Amash, and he's worked with him on a number of capacities. So, Nathan, why don't you just kind of tell your story about how you first met Justin and sort of how you got involved in sort of, and I guess ended up in D.C. Maybe that's a good sort of quick synopsis.
That's a great question. Thanks again for having me on your show. It's great to connect with you, Eric, after these many years. I love you guys and follow you on social media and keep in touch, but it's great to talk in person. So I currently work as the vice president at a public affairs firm here in DC called Targeted Victory. I work primarily with a number of corporate clients in the technology space, kind of helping them navigate the intersection of technology and politics and policy, kind of understanding this ecosystem that is Washington, D.C. I'm not a lobbyist, but I work with a lot of lobbyists, if you will. Before working in this position, I was the chairman. And then before then, I was at R Street Institute, where I was a senior fellow and outreach manager and ran their technology portfolio. So again, a lot of technology policy. And that really was built upon my experience with Representative Justin Amash, where I served in a couple of different capacities. I started with him in the State House as a legislative aide working on education policy and literally anything that Justin, Poppy, and Ben, the whole team there, told me to do. It's funny, I studied to be a high school history teacher and wanted to be a teacher. And unfortunately, in Michigan in the mid-2000s, it was hard to get a teaching job. And one thing led to another. And I got a job in Justin's office where I was doing education policy. The funny thing was, he would have me meet with teachers when they would come in from the teachers union and talk about concerns with, education reform or why school choice is a terrible idea. And I would tell them, well, the reason I'm not a teacher is because of you guys, because of the policies that allow you to do what you do. And so what's funny is I actually worked with the minority House Education Committee at the time. And actually I got to have my hand at helping to draft and just read over what became the teacher tenure reform in Michigan that was passed years after I left the state
when
House.
They became the majority, right?
When they became the majority. By that time I had went with Justin to DC. So we'll get to that in a second. But the funny thing was I loved getting to craft this policy that really enacted revenge on those teachers that kept me from being a teacher. And I realized that it's like that Ben Kenobi situation, Star Wars. You strike me down, I'll become more powerful than you ever know. And that's when I realized I loved politics. I really loved this. This is a fun game. And so now the funny thing was, when you go to work for Representative Justin Amash, you don't go there to play politics. You go there because you believe in something bigger. You believe in the constitutional values and ideology and principles. But understanding the hallways of Congress or the State House really was something that I found very interesting. And so I helped the representative in the district for 7 or 8 months, and then the chairman, the representative, asked me to go with him to DC, where I started out as a staff assistant and took on some policy issues and got to help with the NSA amendment that came out right out of the Edward Snowden revelations, and that really catapulted me into tech policy writ large. So between education and technology policy, I kind of found my little niche, and that's what I've been kind of doing ever since.
How did you initially, because I don't remember you in the campaign, because I mean, usually, so as a background for people who aren't familiar with the state, so for one thing, I'd like to set the record straight that the state house is not full of experts within these state representative offices. These are very,
definitely not.
Right? These are people who are maybe familiar with the process, like getting bills passed or like, how to contact donors, those sorts of things. Generally, it's like there are two people in the office. One is the person who's the guy, the man or woman who ran the campaign. They're usually a campaign manager. And the other person is a legislative aide. You're answering the phone. You're dealing with constituents. You're kind of, but there's not this army of experts in education or whatever it might be, right? I mean, you hopefully hire someone smart and they can kind of figure it out and help you navigate things as your rep. But you don't have this big, huge team that everyone gets the impression like, people always tell me like, oh, well, they'll have I met with the big, all the experts at wherever on, education or healthcare. I'm like, these are people who are like, they're not doctors. They don't know anything about healthcare. They maybe one has a PhD, but for them, you're lucky. They're just like college grads who are in political science. They don't, have special knowledge.
Right. No, I definitely had no special knowledge. I think I was like 24 or 25 when that was happening. The scenario was a little unique. I mean, they hired me to be this staffer, and I think I was generously titled legislative assistant. But like the reality was, I was answering phones, doing constituent mail, maybe going to a hearing and taking notes, which I don't think was ever used for anything. It was just like to keep me busy.
Yeah.
So like, if you say, oh, I was meeting with constituents or meeting with groups, I mean, that's true. The MEA came in to meet with me, but like, I think they were, whoever the lobbyist was or whoever the group was, they were, checking the box, meeting with me. And of course, when you're 24, you think you are the center of the world by doing that. I think the reason that worked out that way was Ben and Poppy were both, doing the state's business, but I think there was also a certain campaign and certain work in Grand Rapids that was also something that they were paying attention to as well. And so, while they were out of session at certain days, I was manning the office, and so I got to do, I think, a little bit more than maybe a traditional front desker would do, and that definitely prepared me for, an eye-opening experience. And I even had no idea I was going to work for Justin after he won the congressional race. I helped on the campaign, in the evenings or weekends. But Poppy and Ben and Chad and that incredible team from back in 2010, that was a great dream team. If you really think about what happened that year. It was an incredible moment that you can't quite replicate, and it's very hard to replicate what they did. I got to help out, and I led, walk teams, and Jeff Amash and others would laugh at me because I would run fast through neighborhoods, would drop as many door hangers as I could within an hour. There's almost like a competition among us young millennials about who could deliver more mail to houses within 30 minutes or whatever. But it was a great experience, and it was a really cool way of seeing up close and personal this world. And I think also indoctrinated me fully in the ideas of limited government and freedom and these ideas that Justin has had since before I met him and has continued to have them a decade later. I mean, it's pretty easy, actually, to be honest. I met him 10 years ago, like today was when I met him. So I was brought in 2010.
And you worked with, so I know him personally. I don't really know him professionally. I never, so, and you obviously know him both ways, right? Like, personally, you get to know people who you're around all the time, and I know you guys, right, especially if you work in the campaign, you meet people, personally too, and professionally. Yeah. I mean, what is your impression of him professionally and personally?
Oh man, I hope this is a long show. I could open a beer and talk for hours about this guy. I mean, he is truly a mentor, and I would want to call him a friend, and hope you would feel the same about me. I mean, we worked together, and I got to watch him grow. But he's just an incredible person to work with. Really cares about his staff around him. He's family focused, which is very rare in politics. He really does care about his family, his children, and he lets us know that, but does it in not an awkward way. I've heard of members of Congress who give their wife or spouse an office within the congressional office, and makes it really awkward for everyone. He never did that. We weren't expected to babysit his children. But the care for them was real clear, and he did that so well, and getting to know his brothers and his family. There was that close knit community around him. But then also with his staff, what was fun is he's not much older than any of us. I mean, I'm just a few years younger than him. So like, here's this 28-year-old, 29-year-old member of Congress. Think about that. A 30-year-old member of Congress like hanging out with us, which is just kind of an amazing thing to think about. Chit-chatting and was fun news. So staffers in Capitol Hill most of them sit in like a bullpen kind of room, and so they're cubicles, terrible furniture, terrible modular furniture. They need to redo the whole thing. But like, he would sit in the middle with all of us, and he would like tell stories about like what was going on that day, or give incredible impressions of John Boehner or whatever it was, and you really felt like you were having this really neat conversation with him. He does expect like a lot of his staff, but like, he's very fair about it. He's not overbearing and not a tyrant, but he expects you to do better. And I became a better writer because of him. I became a more thoughtful communicator. I became more diligent with details because of him, because he wants it done right. Because he expects that of you, but he also holds himself up to that standard as well. And that's a pretty rare thing on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and knowing him personally for many years now, over 10 years. The one thing that strikes me most about him, aside from the fact that he's very principled and lives those principles, like you said, with family and all these things that are important to him, values which I hold, and I think most people in this community in general hold in West Michigan, although probably most Americans hold, frankly.
Sure.
And it's not a phoniness to him.
No.
But the thing that strikes me the most is, here's a guy who is very much a lonely voice in upholding the Constitution, and not, I guess, bending his will to lobbyists and, groveling for money and trading votes for influence or whatever. And yet he remains incredibly optimistic. Like, most people you meet who are libertarian, and I would include myself in this, are fairly defeatist, or like, well, I'm going to do my best to succeed. But I have really no expectation, for instance, that I will win in most of my battles, because generally the status position, or whatever you might want to call it, tends to prevail, right? I mean, or at least that's your impression from someone who's a libertarian. And yet he is not that way. Like, he thinks he's going to win these battles against the NSA, for instance, and he practically did. I mean, it's really remarkable. And even when he loses, he's like, well, we'll just try a different strategy. It doesn't seem to deter him. He doesn't like frustrate, or I don't know. It's pretty amazing, because I think most people would want to bang their head against the wall or shoot themselves in the head. Like, I just can't handle this atmosphere in DC, and he just kind of keeps just going along.
It's really evident when he goes on a traditional media outlet like CNN or Fox. He's never on Fox News, but if he's on like a CNN, actually this interview with Jake Tapper he did last week, Jake, he's kind of negative. He's like all about the impeachment, and it's very like, but you're a lonely voice in the wilderness.
Yeah.
And Justin's like, just like upbeat. He's like, yeah, I'm hanging in there. I feel great. I've never felt better than I did after I left the party. Like, he says it with a conviction that doesn't sound fake, which is such a unique trait that he has compared to so many people in politics, so many people that I've come across. And, again, working on the Hill, working for nonprofits, working in the kind of lobby space, working in the public affairs space, and actually in the administration, I've gotten to see all these different kind of sides of DC, and he really does stand alone in a unique way, but in a very good way, and in a refreshing way. It's funny to me when in May and June and July, when a lot of news was about Justin's political affiliation and his thoughts on the impeachment were written in such a very thoughtful way and elegant way. I had members of the press reaching out to me saying, not like for information on Justin, but more of like, I just like him. Like, these reporters who were in Capitol Hill, like Haley Bird is a perfect example of this, who writes it, I think, for CNN. Yeah. She just, you could tell there's like this actual soft spot in her heart for him, not because she's more biased towards him or against him, but she's like he is such a fresh voice and face to these conversations that you just don't have in DC. And it just comes through, and it always has. That has never changed. Even though his haircuts has changed since the days that I met him.
Thankfully.
He has not changed. Yeah, thankfully. I won't go into that. But I think Emma, I've had that one picture for like 8 years.
Goodness. They still bring it up. Yeah.
The Romulan haircut. It was fantastic. Yeah. He was great, but I mean, they changed, but he has not. I mean, the suits may have changed, but he has not. I think that's a really incredible thing, and it's recognized by his staff and his former staff. So, in August, a month after the announcement of the Declaration of Independence, I actually put together a little happy hour for all the former staff and current staff to get together, and everyone responded. Everyone was there. Everyone who worked on his staff, whether scheduler, staff assistant, chief of staff, was there. And it was really neat to see everyone just like we all flocked to him. He puts his banner up. We're all going to flock to him and have that conversation. What's neat is, though, some of these staff have left and have different thoughts. We might think about politics a little differently, might think of strategy a little differently. But he was kind enough and gracious enough to engage with us and to take our questions and think creatively and discuss and discern and disagree and debate in a really way that I don't think members of Congress would usually do. That was pretty neat to have that happen.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit of the Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? I mean, he's not folksy, and he's very cerebral, intellectual, but I think the genuine and the commitment to sort of be himself is real. And I think yes. People recognize that, and the ones who get to know him, it's very interesting because, generally when you see people describe him, and it's always anonymous source, right? Or almost always, they always describe him as, unable to get along with people. He's a jerk. He's, or whatever. And it generally comes from the leadership of the party back when it was the Republican Party. When I would talk to him, I mean, he'd explain his interactions and things. And I mean, there's always a chance that someone's mischaracterizing their interaction with someone. And so he may think, oh, it was great. And maybe it truly didn't, I mean, we've all had those situations. What do you think the honest, working with colleagues and things like that? I mean, do you really think a lot of them think he's just a terrible person? Or do you think
no?
Or do you think that just sort of they put that there to try and discredit opposition to a bill or something?
It's funny. I've met with those said congressmen and representatives. It's really funny. Most people associate me with Ajit Pai now. It's really funny. Like you oh, you work for Ajit. Oh, what's it like to kill net neutrality? I'm like, I could go on for hours about that. He's such a great guy. Who did you work before? I'm like, oh, Justin Amash. Oh, he's really committed to his positions, isn't he? And I'm like, yeah, that's a really nice way of saying it. Like that's like the way that they would get around it. But I never heard mean. I never heard, hard, difficult personality. Maybe they would say hard to work with because they would perceive his perspective as wooden, and therefore he couldn't change his constitutional perspective, how terrible it is that he's so constitutional. But they would never say that. I've never heard anyone say, oh, he was, a difficult personality. They might say disagree with his positions or whatnot. But I have met with some leadership people who their eye rolls are more dramatic than maybe rank and file members. But it's funny. I was actually meeting with someone from the former Speaker of the House's office, and they confirmed. I mean, the reality was, Justin was. When he talked about those communications with John Boehner, he wasn't lying. That wasn't just, Justin's perspective. That was perceived as well from Boehner's office or other speakers. I mean, that's how he came across. And so I think the funny thing about Justin is he doesn't lie at all. He's like the only politician I met who doesn't actually lie. So whenever he says like he did have good relationships with this person, that person, he's right. He's not misleading you at all. I mean, he really did have those conversations or those relationships.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's move into the next part of the conversation here, which is the fun part.
Yes.
All right. So first, the disclaimer: I assume you and I have no knowledge. We have knowledge of Justin and sort of his intentions, I suppose, but we don't know for sure about anything. We have no idea what's really going to happen. And this is reference to his political future, whether he continues his run for Congress here. I mean, the speculation he continues his run for Congress here in the 3rd District as an independent, where there's already a GOP primary and Democratic primary to run for that seat. And then he runs as an independent. The other alternative that has been floated, and he has not said no to, is that he runs for president. And the only way you realistically run for president, since he's not worth $1 billion, is you have to run as a member of another party. And naturally, the fit would be the Libertarian Party. And so knowing Justin and the fact that he doesn't run for things if he doesn't think he has a chance of winning. Like I may think he has no chance, but I've been wrong a number of times. And he's proven me wrong, and many people, right? Not just... So let's try and imagine a scenario, because running for Congress here as an independent, I don't think there's anything really interesting about that, in the sense that it's just your typical congressional race. It'd obviously be a three-way race. You have to win a plurality where you don't have to have 50%, but there's nothing really special about that, I don't think, unless you think there's something unique about that run. I think it's...
So I do.
Okay, so why don't you go ahead and go through that?
About this. So let me ask you this. First off, and I'll confirm, I have no knowledge. I just have no knowledge. Ask my wife. I have no knowledge of anything, but I have no knowledge about what Justin may or may not do. I would even venture that he may not even know what he will do. Honestly, it's there's probably some Hayekian like reasoning about why he hasn't decided what he's going to do next. Like he hasn't left. He hasn't closed the door on the presidential run, or what's he going to do with the congressional run, but what has been fascinating for me, and I think it's really fascinating among kind of the circles I run in Washington, D.C. And again, I'm not involved in any campaign. I'm not involved in any race. Target Victory is a public affairs firm. I work with corporate clients. I know there are people in my space who work in the elections, but I'm not affiliated with them. I don't work with them. So just get that off my chest. But it is fascinating to hear an incumbent run as an independent in a 50-50 state, in a 50-50 district. That to me is such a fascinating hypothetical that we might see, because Grand Rapids is generally +4, +6 Republican, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Leans Republican. But when has the Republican switched parties, run as an independent, and now you have a situation where the Democrat could potentially win? You know what I mean? Like it's totally changed the calculus of that district. In a way that I just think is really unique. And I don't know if people in Grand Rapids are talking about it, but it is something that people in DC think about and talk about. This is a rare situation. You could see the Republican Party, the RNC, thinking, oh, we have a shot at knocking off this, insurgent incumbent. You also have Democrats saying, oh, we have a shot at winning West Michigan. You also have Justin with like all the cards at his disposal saying, oh, I could still win this and show both parties how wrong they are. This is a very interesting situation.
Actually, you're completely right. And I probably shouldn't have discounted it so much, because you get excited about the big, huge thing at the top of the hill. But
yes.
And I would just for people who are listening who may not realize, when you say 50-50 or +4, +6, that's sort of like the general like Republican versus Democrat, how Republican or Democratic a district is. And you say it's like +4, +6 Republican, which means it's Republican, but not super Republican, right? So it's not like an automatic win. Like there are certain districts that are, +25%. And so really you could almost be Jesus and lose, right? If you're the wrong party. And so this is a district that's split. And so there's so many scenarios you can look at in this race. Like you could say, well, if you're a Democrat, your main goal is to win Democratic seats. Your secondary goal is to deny a Republican to win a seat, because if there's one or two independents, what do you really care? It's one or two votes that you've denied the other side from getting. And so in some level, you could say, it's actually better for us if we just kind of almost sit out the race, because if he's going to take it and beat up the Republican, and let's say he picks up 40% of the Democratic vote, the base here in West Michigan, we don't really care, because we don't want to pour a ton of money. We got all kinds of other things and resources. We got to win a presidential race. We got to win a bunch of Senate seats, all this other stuff. It's just better for us if he just coasts and somehow wins, because then we deny the Republicans. I mean, the other flip side is you could say, well, he's a former Republican running against Republicans and a Democrat, so maybe he just splits up that 54% that's Republican, and now the Democrat wins, like you said. Maybe now this is an opportunity. And so you're right. It absolutely depends on it depends on how he's polling. It depends on how much money he raises. It depends on the candidates in the district. But I don't think many people are really talking about that here, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah. And I think that's pretty typical of any sort of congressional election. I don't think a lot of people, unless you're hardcore into politics, you're not really paying any attention to congressional races. I think it's certainly interesting. And I think the fact that he still is toying with the idea, or he's at least not totally dismissed a run for presidency, that people are kind of waiting to see what happens. And I, now is about when the primary season kind of kicks off and starts heating up, right? And so, how much money you have at hand and all those sorts of things. And those haven't been disclosed until the end of this month on how much money he raised by the end of last year. But one question I have, and maybe you can answer this, is let's say he wins as an independent. What kind of, does it really have a significant impact in DC? I mean, he can't caucus with a party. He still just is a congressman. Would it really have reverberations nationwide? Like people saying, hey, you can win as an independent, or do they say, it's a special situation. It really doesn't, it's a unique sort of congressional district in the way it all happened. And so it doesn't really, it's translatable to any other areas.
It's a great question. I actually think him winning in 2020 in Grand Rapids, in the West Michigan, Grand Rapids, MI3 congressional district, would be huge and actually reverberate in Washington, D.C. And I say that because you have a situation where a couple organizations that were traditional supporters of him, Club for Growth and Freedom Works, I'm going to use those two guys. I'm going to pick on them. Friends of mine, but I'm going to pick on them. They're saying we're going to sit this one out. We don't stand with Justin, who is like, the best member by our scorecards in the history of their scorecards. We're going to sit it out because of his positioning on impeachment, which is, by the way, a really faithful interpretation of the Constitution and precedent and law and understanding limited government. And I'm not commenting on my thoughts on impeachment, just saying what Justin's saying is totally within the realm of a really good perspective to have, a faithful perspective to have. So for them to sit it out, and not just sit it out, but the DeVos family and other people, the big backers and big names to sit this out. If he wins, it shows that he's bigger than those special interests in a way that I don't think people should underestimate. That would reverberate around here. It also says that it proves what he said 10 years ago, which is that Grand Rapids, West Michigan is a unique enough area that would want a libertarian leaning Republican member of Congress in 2010. And he said that there were different people back then who, if you look at the voting, I mean, they've always trended very independent. They voted least with, I think, of all the Republican districts in Michigan, they voted at least with Donald Trump. I mean, they've always been really independently minded. And this would show that his district is a very thoughtful, engaged electorate. And that, again, you could throw Steve Pesca, you can throw Brian Ellis, you can throw all these other people at him, and he still wins. And I think that's a pretty incredible thing to have. I mean, the guy can walk on water at that point. And also, I think it also kind of carries on that kind of Gerald Ford kind of integrity, a legacy that people like to think of that West Michigan area. I have all sorts of theological thoughts about the Dutch Reform history there and all those other things, and my alma mater, Calvin College, but I'm not going to go into
It's Calvin University now, just so you.
That's right. And I know, but they will not give me a free upgrade on my a diploma. I have to buy a new one. It's ridiculous. Anyway, I digress. But so I think it would reverberate back in the district, but I think also in DC. And I do think it is worth considering how an independent caucus could grow. How do people like Angus King, who's independent from Maine in the Senate, think about that? How do other members who, there was a flip in New Jersey where Democrats switched to being Republican to win their seat in 2020. But it does make you wonder, hey, maybe this is the start of something bigger. I think it goes back to something Justin talked a lot about in his op-ed and his reasonings about the impeachment was, and I hope this is a helpful conversation. He talked about how the need to educate the public about what's going on and how the president is not the problem, he's a symptom of the bigger problem. And I think that winning an election, having 2 more years to sit in that position and to grow this power and to say, you can't touch me, to these other special interests in both the left and the right, he has an opportunity to say, no, I am this position, and this is how the public should engage on this. And so, I would encourage him, whether he wins or loses or runs for president or whatever, to take the opportunity to hit as many, Joe Rogan podcasts, as many David Rubin podcasts, as many interviews on TV, go on Fox, go on MSNBC, go on CNN, and tell this story that you have that clearly the people in Grand Rapids resonate with, and see if you can build this audience. Because I think you're right. There is this silent majority of people who want to hear a member or want to hear a candidate say this thing that we all recognize as a bigger problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I guess, there are two. I mean, Bernie Sanders won as an independent for years and years, but I don't feel like it encouraged other people to be independent. And maybe that's because he was a socialist and he just couldn't say that. Well, you're right. It has probably bigger impact. And what's interesting too, as I've always noticed, is that politics as a profession is way more focused. It's more talked about in DC, right? I mean, so when you say people are talking about in DC, I'm like, no one's talking about here because people just aren't. It's not a profession, right? I mean, for the most part, it's a spectator sport at most, and then it becomes important for a couple weeks leading up, or a couple months maybe leading up to the election.
My parents would agree with you. This is not a real profession. I just somehow made it into one for 10 years. But you're totally right. It's like only within the people at my coffee shop or at my bar or on Twitter that I see are talking about this. But it's something that I think would be interesting among the halls of Congress to see how that plays out longer term, especially let's say how 2020 turns out with the election or going on beyond there. So it's also the fact that he's younger than most members. He's like 40 years old. I mean, he has so many political lives he can live. Just even staying in that district, it really does open up doors. But again, the other hypothetical that I'm sure you want to talk about as well is, what if he ran for president? What if he won that? What would that look like? I think it's a very interesting hypothetical to look at as well.
So I don't know how familiar you are with libertarian politics. But I think
you guys are all crazy.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's somewhat of a dumpster fire, the Libertarian Party, and in many levels. And I say that endearingly, right? As someone who toiled for many years, I've been in and out of the Libertarian Party for years. I was out of it pretty much just when I was trying to be active with the Republican Party to try and affect the change that Justin wanted in the Republican Party. I remember saying to my wife, I said, well, if this guy wins, I'm all in the Republican Party to try and move things towards more liberty. Thinking that
were we all like characters of Rogue One? Like, Justin, you want us to deliver this message? We'll all die at the sword of light of Darth Vader to deliver this message of freedom. Is that like what we all did? We did these, we all listened to the Republican Party. We all hung in there for a number of years, some 1 year, some 10 years, and we're all at the end of the day like, screw this place.
Yeah, that's no question the truth. And I would say for me, so I honestly, when I make that pledge, it was like, this is a 3-month pledge, right? It's not really, I'm not giving up. He's going to lose the primary. Well, he won the primary. Well, okay, so he's in the House for a couple of years. I'm all in for a couple of years. And then I think, well, he's probably got 6 years because you have to work pretty hard to get unseated as incumbent in Michigan. Term limits, you're out at 6 years. And then he ran for Congress. Said, well, okay, I'm all in for this. I ran for his House seat, lost, fortunately. And then he just continued to win. I mean, every time you think he's going to lose, he keeps winning. And so I just was in until he was talking to me, and he was like, I'm out. It took him a while to announce, but I thought, good, because I've done about everything I can, and I just can't. I'm not making any progress. Like all the allies who were once Tea Party people, they're just so beholden to the Trump phenomenon that it's a cult of personality in many ways in the party, which is why you don't see it so much in the public, I think, but you definitely see it more in the party and people who are hardcore party people. And it's just, I don't know, just people not bound by or motivated by ideology or principles, I should say. It just, I'm like, what's the point of politics if you're not trying to actually, do the things you said were important to you. So anyway, so that's why I got out. But I think, for him to run for president, the only way you really do it is in the Libertarian Party, because if people don't know, ballot access is almost impossible. It's super duper expensive if you're trying to do it outside of a party. Even the other parties, I suppose if you could do Green Party, but ideologically he doesn't match up with anything within the Green Party. And I think it'd be very challenging for him to get the nomination, even though he'd be one of their highest profile candidates since Ralph Nader. So I don't know. I mean, I guess the first question is, would he win the nomination? I think he would. I don't think it'd be too challenging. And so then the question is, well, the only reason he'd do it is if he thinks he can win. So how does he win? Like, how do you win as a Libertarian Party candidate in 2020 against, I don't know who he thinks is going to win. I mean, it's going to be Trump, obviously. And then I don't know who's going to win the Democratic side. Biden, Sanders, does it matter? I mean, does that like a part of his calculus, which you can't know when you have to announce?
Yeah,
there's a lot of questions.
It is a lot of questions. Let's just put on the hat that I'm going to say that, let's say he wanted to do it. And I think you're right about saying that he doesn't do things unless he thinks he's going to win. That has always been his MO. And I think that's a really valiant perspective to have. And I think he wouldn't do this in the mindset of being an educator to run on an issues campaign to kind of raise awareness. He would do it to win. With that in mind, though, I do think, regardless of whether he did it for that reason or to actually win, I think that it comes down to, you need to get on TV, you need to get on radio, you need to get on the internet and saturate the airwaves. I have been fascinated by the campaign of, and if you see my Twitter, I'm obsessed with him, the Andrew Yang campaign for the same reason. Like, there is something about it. I mean, his ideas are mostly off the wall. But like, there is something about running nonstop and going on every podcast, every show, everything you can do, always being accessible, always being available. I saw him on an Amtrak train, 11 o'clock at night between New York City and Philadelphia and DC. And he got up in the middle of the train and started taking pictures of people, including me. He was extremely exhausted. He was like, I'm going to be Mr. People person. He was the anti-Rand Paul. For those of you at home who don't know, love the senator, but like, he is the most prickliest person you've ever met. Not just me, Matt Welch, the editor of Reason, said the same thing. He's a prickly guy. He's not an easy person to like engage with. I think it's one of the shortcomings in 2016. He just doesn't come across as natural. And I think, for Justin, he would have to kind of do what AOC and Andrew Yang and these other people are doing, where they're willing to go on with anyone. Pete Buttigieg's campaign manager, her name is Liz Smith, and she is famous for saying, I put Pete Buttigieg on every station, including Fox News, because if you're not willing to speak to them, why would you expect their vote? And so what I would say to Justin and his team would be to like get out and meet every person you possibly can, tell your story, because his story can be popular with people, but the problem is they have to know it exists. No one else is saying this story. Yeah. No one else is saying these principles and talking about these ideas. And so how do you expect them to just, I'll just vote for this Justin Amash guy, who I've never heard of, or I heard Fox News talking poorly about him, or the president tweeted about him in a negative way. What he did at that town hall that was covered by so many of the mainstream media is what he needs to do more. He needs to show who he is as a real person. He needs to hold town halls and get out there as much as he can. And I think that would, let's say he did it that way. I'm just using the Nathan Lemur approach, which is, I'm sure, not that, it's not that bold, but it's something that's the way you can get your name out there. The internet allows you to get your story out there to so many more people for such a less amount of money. And look, with a little bit of Russian support, maybe he can win the election.
Because some Facebook ads, right? A couple of Facebook ads, and he'd push him over the top.
That's exactly right.
No, I think it's really good. And I guess, so as a Libertarian candidate, you are on every ballot, because pretty much they're going to be on every ballot. So you have the ability to win any state, theoretically. And so then you have to get a plurality. You don't need to win the entire state. Now, of course, certain states have electoral, based on congressional districts. And so there might be some, like Nebraska, and I think Maine's another one. And then how do you have to, because you have to win a state. I mean, and you have to get to a point where you can win a state, because I think, the main problem that most libertarians have, and well, let's just say all of them, is that people don't think they can win. And if people don't think you can win, they're not going to bother with you. And so how do you get to that point where you can pull high enough to actually convince people that you can win, and more than just stop someone from winning, which is pretty much like, spoiler effect, and that people are like, hey, I can actually vote for this guy and he might actually win. And then it's worth sending money. It's worth campaigning. It's worth, whatever, talk to my neighbors about, and to try and convince them of this. Because, I mean, I think you have two, you're going to have one for sure, and probably two fairly unpopular candidates that he's going to be running against, which will be obviously an advantage. How do you leverage that as a libertarian and actually get to a point where you can get on TV? Because you can do all the town halls you want in front of 40 people in, Tuscaloosa, but that's not going to help you, because you need to get mass media exposure for running for national office.
Yes. I mean, what we're talking about is something would be totally unprecedented and Herculean in so many different ways, and it would be probably the most incredible political upset of all time is what we're predicting or what we're playing with here. But what I also think he would need to do, or someone who is running in that position would need to do, would be to not have an Aleppo moment, first off.
Right.
and to stay on message and to not allow yourself to get distracted by small things like that. But also to really open up to a larger network of people who might be dissatisfied with either parties, and get to a point where now you're starting to think about people who are saying, oh, I don't just want to be a spoiler. I want someone who can get 20, 25%, and then hopefully it goes up to 30 or 40 or whatever it is that you have to win. It is one of these things I just think is so fascinating. I don't know, do you target certain states? Do you go to states like New Hampshire that have live free and die in their in their tagline? Do you go to like Kentucky and hang out with Thomas Massey and Rand Paul the whole time? But then what's Mitch McConnell going to react to that? What the other people of Kentucky are going to do that? You know, how do you play within that to kind of build out to a different audience? The thing I will say is, listen, I'm not in the real America like you, but I will say that the conversation I've had with when I go back to my parents' house in Pennsylvania or go back to Michigan is people are dissatisfied with both parties. Yeah. And so can you play out that dissatisfaction in a way that generates more excitement and more support? And I think we will only know if someone tries it and does it. And I do think that, I do honestly think that, Justin is uniquely qualified and situated to try something that hasn't been done before. And successfully. But I think it also requires building a really good team and getting that team together real quick. That's the thing that I think I've gotten privy to in a way that wasn't before, is the infrastructure to run a campaign, or the infrastructure to run an agency or a congressional office. It requires so much. You need field teams, you need press teams, you need rapid response, you need researchers, you need, all these different things. You need just the administrative side of it, the good schedulers and the good, advanced people. That is a lot of work and a lot of weight to be put together in a short amount of time. And that's where the question comes for him and his team is that, can you guys put this together in a fast enough amount of time to get that, to build that infrastructure? And so that's something that I think is going to be key to that as well. And people, obviously you have a libertarian infrastructure, but they're not good at winning.
No. And I think if anything, if you follow libertarian politics, you say, well, they're actually really good at spending money that gets wasted, right? If you look at the Gary Johnson campaign, hardly any money made it past the consultants, and he raised millions of dollars, right? So, and that's a real big problem. And it's so with a normal campaign, normal by meaning you're either the Democratic or Republican Party, there are good consultants, bad consultants. There are good teams, bad teams you can purchase. On the Libertarian Party, there's probably not a good team you can buy. It's not like a go-to team that's very successful. There are people who are probably reliable, but you have to, like you said, you have to assemble that and put together. I trust him that he could do it. I think the time, like you said, the one thing he's not had to do a lot of is delegation, right? And where you sort of let go of a lot of parts of your campaign and just hope it gets executed the way you want. You can certainly keep your message as you want. Your general strategy can be the same, but as far as, whether people are doing the groundwork that you need done, that's really kind of up to the, people you're just going to trust to sort of coordinate that. And that's probably a hard thing to let go. So in looking at the mechanics of the race, and I would say that people always talk about in the Libertarian Party, if only we hit the threshold to make it into debates. So that's generally 15% polling. I think you and I know that if a Libertarian starts polling at 18, 19%, those debates will get canceled. Right. The two parties will do everything they can, because for their calculus, they understand the mathematics when it comes to just the two of them. And when you start adding someone who's got a significant portion, you don't know where those votes are coming from. Every Republican says every vote, for Libertarians is a waste of, it's a lost vote for the Republicans, but really pretty much the same thing is oftentimes said by the Democrats. And when you look at polling, when Justin's sort of theoretically thrown in there on a few polls, it doesn't look like it's obvious where he's pulling from. And that's generally, I think, where you see most Libertarian. Is it just a protest vote or whatever? And so I would think that your ability to get in a debate is low unless you are absolutely essential where you have to be confronted, right? And so that means right after the convention in May, which is Memorial Weekend, assuming he gets the nomination, then he would have to, I think, really leverage his popularity and celebrity, which he has some because of the impeachment thing and all this, and certainly even with people on the left, and hit a town hall or two on CNN. And you have to be really good, right? Because I think they sort of assess things at that point with where ratings are, right? If you are someone who's drawing people in and they are interested and they want to learn more, if you're good, they'll want to put you on TV more. If you're a dud, you're done, right? And I don't think you'll ever, because then maybe CNN will say, well, even though you're polling at 12%, you're like dynamite television, right? Like Donald Trump, like this guy is a nobody. He doesn't know anything. He's a reality TV star. He doesn't know anything about politics, but he gets ratings, right? And that's really what drives them, because they can make anything news if it gets ratings.
Oh, that's exactly right. And I think it's something that Justin would be difficult for Justin. That going on TV every day and putting himself out there and working with reporters nonstop is not something that's a strong suit, in my opinion. I mean, I think he's great when he does it, but it takes a lot of time. It's not, I'm assuming he would much rather read a book of Hayek or Bastiat than sit on CNN. Although I would hope that with anyone. But I think what's interesting about the media landscape nowadays, and I think that's why every year with new technology and new ways of communicating and new platforms gives us new ways to see more likelihood of someone trying it a different way, trying the election a different way. And I think that, there are people out there who get lots of views. I mean, if you look on YouTube channels, I said David Rubin before, but like Joe Rogan in the same way, these people draw more viewers than cable news.
Right.
The AOC Netflix special, that's going to be watched in every house. If there's a Vice News documentary that gets picked up by HBO or Netflix, now you're opening up to the Game of Thrones audience. Now you're opening up to the Netflix and chill audience, which I'm assuming are kids doing things they shouldn't be doing, but who probably can't vote. So what's the point? But my point is, you are getting to these audiences that you wouldn't otherwise. And through new mediums, you can tell your story to different people. And if you have a good Twitter following, if you have all these different things, you can show to new people. Now, with that said, you still have to go to every coffee shop in Iowa and New Hampshire and Michigan. You have to go to every town hall, but in every church and all these other events and functions, carnivals and everything else. But there are new ways of telling your story and reaching new people. I find it really interesting how, while people don't live on political Twitter every day or aren't following C-SPAN every day, they're fully aware and educated and articulate on the issues of the day. And, I live in Virginia and in Alexandria, and everyone around in my neighborhood was talking tonight about the gun pro gun march and the conversation about that and the realities of what's going on and nuanced positions and it shows that the public are seeing what's going on, but there's not immersed in it to a degree that's nauseating and they're doing other things in their daily lives. And could a guy like Justin or someone else penetrate that conversation in a way that normal voters and regular voters and the undecideds would think about? And I wonder how many Trump supporters or straight ticket Democrats would be like, if someone else was out there, I would reconsider. And I wonder if that's really true in 2020.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt there's a possibility that there's a large contingent of people. I think the question is, of course, how large it is, right? Because when you look at people who self-identify as parties, it's really pretty low. I mean, you're looking about 30%, maybe 40% of people identify hardcore with either Republican or Democratic Party. Well, that leaves 60% of people who don't identify with anybody. You're not going to get all those. I mean, obviously some people lean R, lean D, or whatever, but that presents a large opportunity. And I think, again, it just comes down to legitimacy. Do you seem like a legitimate person who has any remote chance of winning? And it's real easy to say, well, there's no chance. But I would look back to 1992, I think it was 92, with Ross Perot. And that was my first election that I voted in. Yeah. And he was almost at 20% nationally by, whatever. And I think polling is a little better then than it is now. And he dropped out of the race, but he was climbing. Like he wasn't just like at 19 for a long time. He had just been climbing to 19 20%. He was in the debates. I mean, he bought some airtime, which is at that time, that was the only way to get on the TV, right? Because earned media was very much, gatekeeper focused, where, like you said, now it's not. And I think had he not dropped out of the race, because I think he said there were credible threats against his family, I think it was sort of why he dropped out. And then he came back in the race. And at that point, he sort of lost whatever momentum. And I think momentum is a real thing in politics. But I think it could have, I don't know what would have happened, which states he could have won, but I think he had a legitimate chance of winning some states on accident or, And so that's why I think it's probably as far-fetched as it seems to us, because again, you've had a Republican and Democrat win since, I don't know, how's it, like 1930 or something, or 1830? I mean,
since the Whigs.
Right. I mean, it's been a long time. And so you just can't imagine anything different. But there are all kinds of things we can't imagine anything different until something different happens. And then you're like, well, of course. I mean, naturally, this was going to happen. You saw the erosion of the party, preferences by voters and blah, blah, blah. And suddenly becomes sort of, or maybe just blame the Russians. But essentially, that's, I don't think it's like impossible. Now, I don't know what the percentage chance would be. I think it's very low. But it's not even like so close to zero that you can't see it. I think there's like some percentage chance because he has a voice that's realistic for a number on the left, which never was the case before because of the impeachment. And here's a guy who's willing to go against his party. He's willing to just say what he thinks. And he actually has the most articulate defense of his position versus it's very partisan both ways, right? Otherwise, there's not many people who are thinking about the impeachment process, at least politicians. So I think he has an opportunity from the left, much like Ron Paul had an opportunity to draw people from the left with the war issue back in 2007 and 8. And then I think, his credentials as far as his fiscal conservatism, blah, 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 and sort of libertarian positions are popular with people on the right pre-Trump.
I think these are all, again, it plays into the underdog story. And I mean, David beat Goliath. The United States beat Great Britain back in 1776 to 83. So, things can happen. Ragtag groups can move mountains, and we do live in an era of unprecedented political realities. So, let's say he got to that. I think it would be an incredible thing, and I would hope that people like us would be able to say that we knew him from the beginning if that was the case. But I think also in the same way, if he doesn't win and if he did lose or even lost the congressional race, I think there's a large number of people who would be better because of that service and what he's done, and look for him as an inspiration, someone who stood for the right thing. He is at the end of this, he's gonna do something pretty unprecedented in so many different ways. He's either going to be a member of Congress with integrity, which is so rare these days, or he's going to be the president of the United States, which is pretty awesome.
Well,
it's a win-win.
And I always go back when I'm on other shows and talk to people about him. I say the one thing that struck me is the consistency. I sat down at a family reunion with Ron Paul, and I'll tell you that story sometime. But anyway, I sat down also with his nurse, who had been his nurse who's also his sister-in-law. And she was the first person to contribute to him when he ran for Congress in the 70s. And she wrote, back of her, he wrote a thank you note back to her. And he wrote down his principles, sound money, non-intervention, whatever. And she said it has not changed or wavered in, 30 years or whatever it was. And I feel like with Justin, it's very similar in the sense that there's that consistency and his goal, even different than I think Ron Paul. I think Ron Paul had the same general focus in changing policy, but I don't. The one difference I would say is I think Justin has always looked at it a little differently, in that the office is doing the job, but it is convincing as many people as he can using that position to convince them that those positions are the right ones, those of liberty. And so I think that when he makes his calculus of what he's going to do, he bases it on likelihood of winning, but also the impact you're going to have. What's going to be a bigger impact? Being in Congress for another 2 years as an independent, like you said, that's pretty good impact.
Right.
Or a campaign for presidency. Now, maybe he gets no media coverage, it's a total failure, and he doesn't, make any impact at all, and he'd been better off running for Congress. But I think that's the real calculation he's making, because his main goal is not to be a congressman or to, even be president or whatever. Right. I think it's to push those ideas and, policies, certainly if you can, and that's his overarching, drive. And it's not so much the acclaim that may come with being in office or something like that, which I know people don't believe me when I say that, but I can tell you, I mean, that every indication I have in being with him and spending time with him is that's really his singular focus.
No, and I think that's totally true, and I would testify to that because it fits in with what I said from the beginning. I mean, everyone who ever worked for him in some capacity, except for that random woman in the town hall who never worked in the office. That lady was a complete hack. The lady who stood up and said, "I worked for you," blah, blah. It's like you may have done a door knock.
Right.
Congratulations.
Yeah, sure.
What does that mean? But when it comes to people who worked for him in the state house and in Congress, and those deep relationships he's had with colleagues who developed those real relationships and who may disagree with him on issues, but he stayed close friends with. I mean, they're all a testament to him. I mean, the people, outside of, me, who's been a complete failure and a complete hack and crony shill in Washington,
right,
D.C., swamp monster that I am, there's so many people who are going on to do really great things. His former legislative director has written multiple balanced budget amendments that have been incredible examples of good legislating, has then gone on to do great fiscal responsibility advocacy. People who've served in the Senate, the highest ranks, worked at the FCC and worked in other places doing incredible things and being a good example to those around them. And, you can tell an Amashite by the way that people talk about policy issues. And they're not Machiavellian in the way they think about policy, in the way they think about politics. They really do weigh things and measure things in the way that Justin taught us. And I think that's, one of the reasons I would say I hope he stays in Washington is because I would hope for more generations of these type of staffers to come out of his team, because we're a pretty incredible group. The Amash Alumni Association has some people doing phenomenal things, and so I would hope that there would be more of them. But if the voters feel differently or he feels differently, that's a loss for me and my plan to take over Washington D.C. with a bunch of Amashites. But I get it; they're bigger fish than bigger fish to fry.
Yeah, and the D.C. metro area is pretty big. So I think
yes, it is. But it is. I mean, it is funny when you meet, a Rand Paul office staffer or a Ron Paul staffer, Justin, Thomas Massey, or some of the other guys, even Jared Polis' former staffers, and some other, Democrats who I loved working with as well. They're you can tell their staff. You can tell them from the crony, the crony, establishment types. It's very funny how you can see them. A mile away, you can tell them apart from everyone else. It's a pretty neat thing.
Yeah. Well, I actually had a bunch of other questions, but I think we kind of need to wrap it up. But maybe we do this another time. And honestly, we're getting to it's mid-January. So we're recording this is January 20th. On the 31st of January, the fourth quarter fundraising has to be released through the FEC, mm-hmm. And I think it's possible at that point we may get some more movement. There's, I think, if you're going to run for or run for president, there are a lot of state conventions that are starting to come up in February and March. And so you probably have to, I mean, if he's going to make a decision, I would think it'd happen within the next 30 days. I don't know that, but I mean, if you try and walk into the convention in May at the last minute, you certainly hurt your chances nationally. But also, it makes it more challenging in the party itself to try and capture the nomination. So I suspect we'll know relatively soon one way or the other what the plan is.
We will, and I look forward to, I guess I'm going to have to check out your Patreon and get more of these dispatches. But no, anytime, happy to have the conversation, and I'm sure we'll have news one way or the other in the coming weeks. I think your analysis is spot on.
Yeah, we'll have to discuss what happens if it goes to the House, because that'd be very interesting.
Yes.
Discussion.
Yes,
all right. Hey, Nathan, thank you so much for being on the Paradox, or we'll call it the Amash Files. Is that what you kind of like?
There you go.
I think
that sounds good. The Amash Files. This is good. This is
cool.
Good.
Well, I mean, if something exciting happens, we may have to do this more regularly, because as the ultimate DC insider, AKA the only one I know, I think it's a real fun discussion for the next couple months.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Either way, good to talk to you, and thanks for having me on, and keep it up.
Thanks so much. Well, I hope you enjoyed that discussion, and if you want to get more of these dispatches, please be sure to visit the Patreon page at patreon.com/theparadox, which is THEPARADOCS. Depending on what happens in the future, the frequency of these could certainly increase, and so I really hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. I just enjoy talking about the speculation and certainly reporting what the news, and at some point, hopefully there'll be a lot of news to keep track of what Justin's been up to, either within this district or maybe if he decides to run for president, what's going on nationwide. As always, I'd like to finish the show with my son Andy, who is 14 at the time he died on August 15th, 2018. He's singing his solo, this Christmas Before, an extra time to his mother with the Grand Rapids Choir of Men and Boys. He then performed this for the Christmas concert that season. Miss you, Andy. Always will.